Sophia Rogers lived a life built on early mornings and honest miles. As a street-level delivery courier, she moved through the city before most people opened their eyes, sorting packages in the dark, memorizing routes, showing up on time without fail. To the customers who answered their doors, Sophia was just a slim young woman in a red cap and uniform, handing over a bag with a quiet nod and a tired smile. She never talked about who she knew. She never explained why certain deliveries had no address label, no tracking number, and no record in any system. She preferred the clean simplicity of the road over the dangerous, high-pressure world operating silently beneath it. Nobody knew that the girl in the red uniform making runs across the city was the most trusted personal courier of Kim Yong-Sun, the coldest, most calculating Korean Mafia boss in the country. Yong-Sun did not trust banks, emails, or middlemen with what mattered most. He trusted Sophia. And in his world, that trust was the equivalent of a loaded weapon, one that nobody on the street could see. But safety built on silence is always one wrong encounter away from shattering. When Officer George Bradley, a broad-shouldered, badge-heavy bully who had spent years treating low-income neighborhoods like his personal tax, spotted Sophia making a delivery on his block, he saw exactly what he always saw: nobody. A young black woman in a cheap uniform, carrying a paper bag, with no one powerful enough to push back. He had done this 100 times. He grabbed her arm, fabricated a charge on the spot, ripped the delivery bag from her hands, and put her in handcuffs on the open sidewalk while bystanders watched in stunned silence. Bradley thought he was just keeping order on his block. He had no idea that the sealed envelope now sitting in his jacket pocket belonged to the most dangerous man in the city. And he had no idea that before the patrol car door even closed, Sophia's thumb had already found the one contact on her phone that would end his career, his freedom, and everything he thought his badge protected him from. He was not arresting a nobody. He was pulling the pin on a grenade he could not see. Hello, and welcome to Midnight Mob Chronicles. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we are just getting started. Now, let's get into the story. The afternoon was ordinary in every way that mattered. The sky over the district was pale gray, and the sidewalks were loud with foot traffic and exhaust. Sophia had 6 more stops on her route. She walked with the easy, practiced rhythm of someone who had done this 1,000 times, bag in both hands, cap pulled low, eyes forward. Officer George Bradley was already on the corner. He stood with his arms crossed and his shoulders square, the way men do when they want you to know they own the ground they're standing on. He was big, broad across the chest, short brown hair going silver at the temples, and he had the particular stillness of someone who had never once been challenged and fully expected to keep it that way. His eyes landed on Sophia the moment she rounded the corner. She kept walking. Head down. Route to finish. Nothing to prove. But Bradley stepped directly into her path. Sophia stopped. She looked up at him, wide eyes, mouth slightly open, the delivery bag clutched tightly against her chest. Where are you going? What's in the bag? She explained her delivery. She gave her company name. She stayed calm, the way she had learned to stay calm in situations like this, because situations like this had happened before, and losing your composure never helped. Bradley didn't want an explanation. He had already decided what this was. He reached out and grabbed her arm. Sophia's alarm went off at 4:45 every morning, and she never hit snooze. By 5:15, she was already in the sorting facility on the south end of the city, working through her assigned stack in the pale yellow light of the warehouse. The other couriers moved slowly at that hour, coffee cups in hand, making conversation over the hum of the conveyor belts. Sophia kept her head down and her hands moving. She cross-checked every package against her route sheet, organized her bag by drop order, and was signed out and on the street before most of her coworkers had finished their first cup. That was simply how she operated. Not because anyone demanded it. Because she demanded it of herself. She had been running deliveries in this city for 3 years, and in 3 years she had built one reputation worth having: she was never late. Not in the rain, not in the cold, not on double route days when her feet ached by noon and her shoulders burned from the weight of the bag. Other couriers called in sick, took long lunches, or let packages sit in holding when a route got complicated. Sophia rerouted, adjusted, and kept moving. Her on-time record was the cleanest in the district, and she wore that fact quietly, the way people wear things that genuinely matter to them. She was not doing this forever. She knew that. But as long as this was her job, she was going to do it with everything she had. The city came alive slowly around her as the morning hours passed. Shop owners rolled up their gates. Buses groaned through the intersections. The smell of food from early kitchen prep drifted out from the restaurants along her route. Sophia moved through it all like she was part of the city's own machinery, steady, reliable, invisible in the best possible way. People glanced up when she knocked, took their packages, and went back inside. She was already moving to the next stop before the door closed behind them. On most mornings, that was the whole of it. Ordinary work, honestly done. But on certain mornings, not every week, sometimes not even every 2 weeks, there was one stop that was different from all the others. It came with no notice. No scheduling alert in the app, no special instructions from the dispatch office. She would simply arrive at the facility to begin her sort, and nestled flat at the bottom of her assigned stack, beneath all the labeled packages and standard envelopes, there would be a single slim parcel. No address. No barcode. No sender name. Just a narrow envelope sealed with dark wax, and a small folded card tucked beneath the string that bound it. The card always had the same 2 words written in the same clean, unhurried hand. For delivery. The first time she found one, nearly a year ago now, she had held it for a long moment under the warehouse light, turning it over in her hands. She had known, even then, who it came from. The pay arrangement that accompanied those envelopes was handled separately, in cash, delivered to her apartment mailbox in a plain white envelope the morning after each successful drop. The amount was always the same, and it was always more than she made in a full week of standard routes. She had made a decision that first morning quickly and without much ceremony. She tucked the envelope flat against the bottom of her delivery bag, settled the other packages on top of it, and went out to do her job. She had not asked questions then. She did not ask them now. Today was one of those mornings. She was 3 stops into her route when a black car she recognized pulled smoothly to the curb ahead of her. The engine stayed running. The windows were tinted dark. A rear door opened just enough for a hand to extend, pale, unhurried, a plain silver watch at the wrist, holding the sealed envelope. Sophia walked to the car without breaking her stride, took the envelope with a steady hand, and gave a single small nod toward the tinted glass. The door pulled shut. The car moved away from the curb and disappeared into traffic as cleanly as it had arrived. She didn't watch it go. She tucked the envelope flat beneath everything else in her bag, adjusted the strap on her shoulder, and kept walking. That was the entire transaction. 30 seconds, maybe less. No words. No eye contact with anyone on the sidewalk. No hesitation in her step that might cause someone to look twice. Discretion was not just a rule in her line of work. It was the reason she was still in it. She had understood from the beginning that the value she provided to Kim Yong-Sun was not speed or strength or any particular skill. It was the fact that she looked exactly like what she appeared to be, a delivery girl doing her rounds, unremarkable, forgettable, beneath a second glance. The moment that changed, she was no longer useful. And in the world Yong-Sun operated in, people who were no longer useful did not simply get let go. She had never spoken his name out loud to anyone. She had never described the car, the envelope, or the drops to a single person on earth. The only evidence that any of it existed lived in one place, a contact saved in her phone under a single letter, buried 3 screens deep, with no photo and no call history visible on the surface. Why? She had never needed to use it. She hoped, as she always did on mornings like this, that today would not be the day that changed. George Bradley had worked the Garfield district for 11 years, and in 11 years, he had developed a very particular understanding of how the world operated. Power was not something you were given. It was something you took, maintained, and demonstrated regularly so that everyone within range understood exactly where they stood in relation to you. A badge made you legitimate. But presence, the right kind of presence, the kind that made a shop owner's eyes drop to the floor when you walked in, that was something you built yourself, one interaction at a time, over years of careful and consistent pressure. Bradley had built it well. He started his shift the same way he always did, pulling his patrol car slowly down the length of Garfield Avenue with the window down, letting people see him before he saw them. He watched the way bodies shifted when his car rolled past. The food cart vendor near the corner of 5th, a small Haitian man named Louis who had been working that spot for 6 years, straightened up and looked straight ahead, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. A group of teenagers near the laundromat peeled off the wall they were leaning against and found somewhere else to be. A woman pushing a stroller crossed to the other side of the street without looking back. Bradley noted all of it with quiet satisfaction. That was a well-maintained block. He parked near the corner and stepped out, rolling his shoulders back and letting the morning air settle around him. He was a big man, broad through the chest and thick in the arms, the kind of build that filled a doorframe and made people instinctively recalibrate their behavior before a word was spoken. He wore his uniform with the sleeves fitting tight at the bicep, his badge catching the pale morning light. He moved without hurry because men who hurry are men who are chasing something. Bradley never chased. Everything on this block eventually came to him. Louis was already watching him approach from behind the cart, one hand resting on the metal edge like he needed something to hold on to. Bradley stopped in front of the cart and looked over the spread of foil containers and stacked cups without particular interest. He picked up a paper cup, turned it over once, set it back down. "Health inspector came through last week," Bradley said, not looking at Louis. "Left some notes. Flagged a few things on your setup." Louis said nothing. He knew, as he always knew, that this was not a conversation about health inspections. "I smoothed it over," Bradley continued, finally meeting the man's eyes with an expression of practiced reasonableness. "Told him your operation was clean. That you were good people over here." Louis reached beneath the cart and produced a small envelope. He placed it on the metal surface without a word, his eyes moving briefly to the sidewalk and back. Bradley picked it up and slid it into the inside pocket of his jacket in one unhurried motion, the way a man pockets his own car keys. "Good man," Bradley said, and moved on. 2 blocks down, a woman was waiting outside the corner pharmacy where she worked the register. She had called the non-emergency line 2 days ago about a break-in attempt at the back entrance, a report Bradley had received, reviewed, and filed at the bottom of his attention. He spotted her now standing with her arms crossed, watching him approach with the specific look of someone who has already half expected to be disappointed. She explained the situation again. The back lock had been pried at. She had photographs. She had a neighbor who saw 2 men trying the door after midnight. Bradley listened with the expression of a man listening, which was different from the expression of a man who intended to do anything with what he heard. He nodded at the right moments. He wrote nothing down. When she finished, he told her these things happened, that the area had seen some activity lately, that she should make sure her locks were updated and consider a camera system for the back entrance. She stared at him for a moment. Then she went back inside. This was the rhythm of his days, and it had been for years. Not every officer on the district operated the way he did, he was not naive enough to think the whole precinct was built like him. But enough of them were indifferent, overworked, or quietly complicit that Bradley had never once felt the friction of real accountability. His arrest numbers were solid. His paperwork was clean, or clean enough. His captain was a man who valued a quiet block over an honest one, and Bradley's block was always quiet because fear was a very effective form of order. The complaints that had been filed against him over the years, and there had been several, filed by residents with specific memories and specific grievances, had moved through the department's internal process and emerged on the other side as nothing. Insufficient evidence. Unsubstantiated. Matter reviewed and closed. Bradley knew this because he had checked every single one. He leaned against his patrol car now and surveyed the length of Garfield Avenue with the calm authority of a man who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. The vendors were at their posts. The sidewalks were moving. The city was doing what cities do, generating money, generating friction, generating opportunity for men who knew how to position themselves correctly. He had built something real here. Something durable. In 11 years, not one person on this block had been able to touch him. He had absolutely no reason to believe today would be any different. Sophia turned onto Garfield Avenue at 11:43 in the morning. She had 2 stops left on her route, a package for a dental office on the corner of 6th, and a standard envelope dropped 3 blocks further north. The sealed delivery from the black car was tucked flat at the bottom of her bag, exactly where it always rode, invisible beneath the other packages. She had carried it this way a dozen times without incident. The drop point was still 4 blocks away. She was on schedule, her head was down, and she was thinking about nothing except the order of her remaining stops. She did not notice Bradley immediately. She was already halfway down the block before she registered the patrol car parked at the curb and the large figure leaning against it, arms crossed, watching the street. She kept her pace even. There was no reason to adjust. She was a courier doing her route. She had documentation for every package in her bag. She had done nothing wrong and had nothing to hide, nothing that anyone with a legitimate reason to look would ever find. She was 10 feet past his car when he spoke. "Hey. Red cap. Stop." She stopped. She turned around slowly, keeping her expression neutral and her shoulders loose. Bradley had already pushed off the car and was moving toward her, covering the distance between them with the unhurried confidence of a man who had never needed to rush to establish control. He looked her over once, the uniform, the bag, the cap, and his expression settled into something she recognized immediately. Not suspicion. Not concern. Calculation. He was deciding what this was going to be, and he was going to make that decision regardless of anything she said. "Where are you coming from?" he asked. She told him. She gave the company name, said she was finishing her afternoon route, offered to show him her delivery manifest on her phone. Bradley didn't look at her phone. He looked at the bag. "What's in there?" "Packages for my route," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I can show you the manifest. Everything is logged. Open it." She felt the first cold pull of alarm move through her chest, but she kept it off her face. "I don't think you have grounds to." He reached out and grabbed her arm. His grip was immediate and hard, his fingers closing around her forearm just above the wrist, yanking her forward and off balance before she had finished the sentence. The bag swung wide. She grabbed it with her free hand on instinct, clutching it tightly to her side. "Don't tell me what grounds I have," Bradley said, his voice dropping low. "You're obstructing an officer. You understand me?" There were people on the sidewalk. She could see them in her peripheral vision, a woman near the pharmacy doorway, 2 men outside a hardware store, a teenager on a bicycle who had stopped pedaling. Several phones had already come up. She noted all of it and forced herself to stay still, to breathe, to not give him anything he could use to escalate further. Bradley wrenched the bag from her grip with his free hand and dropped it onto the hood of his patrol car. He unzipped it without hesitation, without waiting, without any pretense of procedure. He moved through the top layer of packages quickly, pushing them aside. Then his hand found the flat sealed envelope at the bottom. He held it up and looked at it for a moment. No label. No barcode. No address. Sophia watched his face and said nothing. He turned it over once, the same way she had turned it over a year ago under the warehouse light. Then, with the same casual motion he had used to pocket Louis's envelope that morning, he slid it into the inside pocket of his jacket. "Unmarked package in a courier's bag with no delivery record," he said, re-zipping the bag and tossing it back at her. "That's probable cause." It was not probable cause. There was not a legal framework in any jurisdiction that made it probable cause. But Bradley was not making a legal argument. He was making a power argument, and in this particular zip code, for the past 11 years, those had been exactly the same thing. He pulled her around by the arm and pressed her up against the side of the patrol car. She heard the cuffs come off his belt before she felt the cold metal close around her wrists. He recited a charge, disorderly conduct, obstruction, in the flat, rehearsed tone of someone filling out a form they have completed many times before. The people on the sidewalk kept filming. Nobody moved to intervene. Bradley opened the rear door of the patrol car and put his hand on the top of her head the way officers do, guiding her into the back seat. She folded herself in, the door still open for one more second as he reached for her bag to place it in the trunk. In that 1 second, with her cuffed hands in her lap and the door still ajar, Sophia turned her face toward the window. Her fingers found her phone in her jacket pocket, the outer pocket, not the one Bradley had checked. She did not look down. She navigated by memory alone, 3 screens and 4 taps, a path her thumb had rehearsed without ever intending to use. She pressed the single contact saved under the letter Y. 1 tap. That was all it took. The car door closed. The lock clicked. And Sophia sat back against the seat and stared straight ahead as Bradley pulled away from the curb, completely certain he had just handled another nobody on his block. The precinct on Garfield processed about 40 people on a busy afternoon, and nobody moved fast for anyone who came in through the back door in handcuffs. Sophia was walked through the rear entrance at 12:17 and deposited in front of the intake desk, where a heavy-set officer with reading glasses perched at the end of his nose looked up at her for exactly as long as it took to determine she was not a priority and looked back down at his paperwork. Bradley handed over a single sheet, the incident report he had already filled out, she noticed, which meant he had written it before she was even in the car, and exchanged a few quiet words with the intake officer that she could not fully hear. She caught her name, a case number, and the words hold for processing before Bradley stepped back and the intake officer stamped something without reading it. She was moved to a holding area, a long bench bolted to a pale green wall, a water fountain that ran lukewarm, a ceiling vent that clicked every 40 seconds with mechanical regularity. 2 other women sat at the far end of the bench, not speaking. A uniformed officer sat at a desk near the door, filling out forms, not looking at any of them. Sophia sat down, placed her hands in her lap, and breathed. She had been in difficult situations before. Not this specific situation, but the general category of it, the kind where the system has decided something about you before you open your mouth, and every word you say afterward is filtered through that decision rather than evaluated on its own merit. She had learned, through years of being a young black woman navigating institutions that were not built with her comfort in mind, that composure was the only tool that could not be taken from her. Not defiance, not argument, not tears. Composure. The quiet, steady refusal to come apart. She sat straight on the bench and waited. An hour passed. Then another. At some point she asked the officer at the desk when she could expect to be processed and when she would have access to a phone call. He told her someone would be with her shortly, in the tone of a man who uses the word shortly to mean something between 1 hour and never. She nodded and sat back down. She understood what was happening. It was not complicated. Bradley had connections inside this building, which meant her paperwork was sitting at the bottom of someone's stack, which meant her processing would take as long as he needed it to take. This was how the machine worked when it was being operated by someone who knew where the levers were. She was not being punished for anything she had done. She was being held in place while Bradley's version of events calcified into the official record, undisturbed by her presence or her objections. The duty sergeant came through the holding area at around 2 in the afternoon. He was a lean man with a gray mustache and the particular brand of tired that came not from overwork but from years of choosing not to see things that were inconvenient to look at. He glanced at the women on the bench the way you glance at furniture, registering their presence without engaging with it, and said something quietly to the officer at the desk before moving on. Sophia watched him go. She had half expected this. The intake officer's body language when Bradley handed over the report, the speed with which he had stamped and moved on, the complete absence of any follow-up question, it all pointed to a precinct where Bradley was known, trusted in the way that corrupt men are trusted by other corrupt men, protected by the shared weight of accumulated silence. Nobody here was going to look too carefully at his incident report. Nobody was going to pull the footage from the block cameras on Garfield Avenue. Nobody was going to ask the people on the sidewalk, several of whom had been recording on their phones, what they had actually witnessed. Sophia had known, on some level, the moment his hand closed around her arm that fighting back in the conventional sense was not an option available to her. Not here, not today, not against a man who had spent 11 years building a machine for exactly this purpose. The law on paper and the law as it was practiced in this building were two different documents, and she had been handed the second one the moment she walked through that back door. But she had made the call. That was the thing Bradley did not know, could not know, had no framework to even imagine. While he sat somewhere in this building feeling the clean, familiar satisfaction of a situation handled, a clock had already started running that had nothing to do with paperwork or processing times or any system he had ever had access to. She did not know exactly what would happen next. She did not need to. She knew only that the single tap she had managed in the back of the patrol car had reached the one person in this city for whom Bradley's 11 years of careful construction meant absolutely nothing. And that person did not work through precincts, or incident reports, or duty sergeants who looked the other way. He worked through other means entirely. So Sophia sat on the pale green bench with her hands folded and her back straight and her face composed and still. She listened to the vent click. She watched the light through the single high window move slowly across the floor as the afternoon hours passed. She did not beg. She did not break. She simply waited, with the particular patience of someone who already knows the ending. The alert came through at 11:44 in the morning. He had been reviewing a logistics document when his personal phone, not the one his organization used for general operations, but the secondary device that held exactly 4 contacts, vibrated once on the table beside his right hand. The alert was a single character. Not a message, not a call. Just the automated signal from a contact he had set up a year ago with the specific instruction that it should never be used, until now. Yong-Sun set down his pen. He did not reach for the phone immediately. He sat for a moment in the particular stillness that had always distinguished him from other men in his position, not the stillness of someone suppressing emotion, but the stillness of someone whose mind was already moving through the problem with a speed and precision that required the rest of him to stay very quiet. The envelope had not arrived. He had noted that 40 minutes ago and filed it as an anomaly worth monitoring. He had not yet escalated it because Sophia did not miss deliveries, and in his experience, the first explanation for a thing was rarely the most accurate one. He had been waiting for data before drawing conclusions. The signal was data. He picked up a different phone, the operational line, and made a single call. It was answered on the second ring by a man who handled the ground-level logistics of Yong-Sun's district operations, a quiet and efficient person who had been with the organization for 9 years and who understood that when this particular number called, the appropriate response was information delivered quickly and without editorializing. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. By the end of it, Yong-Sun knew the following: Sophia had been stopped on Garfield Avenue at approximately 11:43. She had been handcuffed and placed in a patrol car belonging to an officer George Bradley, badge number confirmed through the plate on the vehicle. She had been transported to the district precinct. A bystander who had recorded the incident and posted it publicly had captured the moment Bradley reached into the delivery bag and removed an item, which he placed in his jacket rather than logging as evidence. Yong-Sun listened to all of this without interrupting. When the man on the other end finished, there was a brief silence. "Thank you," Yong-Sun said, and ended the call. He set the phone down on the table and picked up his cigarette from the edge of the ceramic ashtray beside the kettle. It had been burning untouched for several minutes and had gone mostly to ash. He took one slow draw, held it, and exhaled toward the ceiling. Then he pressed the cigarette into the ashtray and left it there. He stood. There were 3 men in the room, 2 near the door, one at the far end of the table with a laptop open in front of him. They had been present for the phone call and had heard Yong-Sun's half of it, which told them enough. They were all watching him now with the focused, ready attention of people who have learned to read the temperature of a room from a single shift in posture. Yong-Sun straightened his jacket. He did not raise his voice. He did not move with urgency or anger or any of the performative intensity that lesser men use to signal that something serious was happening. He simply looked at the man nearest the door and spoke 4 words in a tone so level and quiet it might have been a comment about the weather. "Find everything on Bradley." That was all. The man near the door was already moving before the sentence was fully finished. The one at the laptop had his hands on the keyboard. The third reached for his phone as he stood, stepping toward the far corner of the room for privacy. Within the next 6 minutes, 3 separate inquiries were initiated through channels that had no traceable connection to each other or to the 4th floor room where Yong-Sun now stood looking out at the gray courtyard below. One went to a person embedded in the city's financial regulatory infrastructure. One went to a former records administrator who now operated privately and very selectively. One went to a journalist who owed the organization a significant and long outstanding debt and who had been waiting, without knowing it, for exactly this kind of assignment. None of these people knew about the others. None of them knew why the request was coming. They knew only that it had come from the direction it had come from, and that was sufficient. The city did not shudder or crack. Nothing visible changed on any street or sidewalk. The afternoon continued exactly as it had been, buses running, vendors selling, people moving through their ordinary hours without any awareness that something had been set into motion above them. But it had been set into motion. Quietly, precisely, and without a single wasted word. George Bradley was still sitting somewhere in his precinct, comfortable and completely unaware, when the first thread of his carefully constructed life was pulled. Bradley finished his shift at 6 and drove himself to a bar 3 blocks from the precinct where he had been drinking for the better part of a decade. He felt good. That was the honest truth of it. The afternoon had gone smoothly, the girl was processed and held, the envelope was sitting in the inside pocket of his off-duty jacket at home, and the duty sergeant had made sure her paperwork moved at a pace that gave Bradley's version of events plenty of time to settle into the record undisturbed. He had done this kind of thing enough times to know that the first 24 hours were the most important. After that, the official account became the real account, and everything else became noise. He ordered a beer and checked his phone out of habit. The first thing he noticed was a missed call from a number he recognized as belonging to one of his longest-running informants, a man named Teller who had been feeding Bradley street-level information for 7 years in exchange for having 3 separate assault charges quietly redirected into the system's blind spots. Teller did not call. That was the arrangement. Bradley called Teller when he needed something, and Teller answered. The fact that the call had come the other direction was unusual enough that Bradley set his beer down and rang back immediately. The number went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. He set the phone on the bar and told himself it was nothing. Teller was unpredictable. It probably meant nothing. By 7:30, it had started to mean something. His second informant, a woman who managed a check cashing operation on the east end of his district and who had been providing Bradley with names and addresses of people moving cash through her shop for the better part of 5 years, sent him a text message that was so unlike her normal communication that he read it 3 times to make sure he was understanding it correctly. It was 2 sentences, formal and precise, informing him that she was recanting the statements she had provided in connection with 2 specific cases from the previous year. She cited new legal counsel. She did not respond to his reply. Bradley stared at his phone for a long moment. Then he called his captain. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. He sent a text, short, casual, the kind of message that would look unremarkable to anyone who happened to see it, and watched the screen for 5 minutes waiting for the 3 dots that would indicate a response was coming. They never appeared. He paid for his beer and drove home. The envelope was where he had left it, in the inside pocket of his jacket on the hook behind the bedroom door. He took it out and held it for a moment under the lamp, turning it over the way he had on the sidewalk that afternoon. He still did not know what was inside it. He had not opened it, some instinct had told him to leave it sealed, at least for now, and looking at it again in the quiet of his apartment, that instinct was growing louder. He put it in the drawer of his bedside table and tried to sleep. He did not sleep. By 8 the next morning, he was back at the precinct, and the first thing that reached him was a look from the desk officer near the entrance, a brief, sidelong glance that lasted half a second too long and then disappeared, the kind of look that meant something had moved through the building before he arrived. He felt it the way animals feel pressure changes before weather arrives. A shift in the atmosphere that had no single identifiable source. He was at his desk for 20 minutes when his phone buzzed with an internal notification informing him that a complaint had been filed with the department's Internal Affairs Division referencing his name, badge number, and 3 specific incidents spanning the past 14 months. The notification was procedural, he was entitled to know a review had been opened, but attached to it was a secondary note from the IA intake office indicating that the complaint had arrived with supporting documentation that was currently being evaluated. Bradley read the notification twice. Then he picked up his phone and called his captain again. This time it rang once and disconnected. Not voicemail. Disconnected. The call had been declined. He sat very still at his desk for a moment, the phone in his hand, a cold and unfamiliar sensation beginning to spread through his chest. He opened his banking app, not his regular account, but the secondary one he maintained under a different name at a small regional bank that he had been using for a decade to receive the envelopes from the shop owners and vendors on his block. He checked the balance the way he checked it every few days, expecting the number he always saw. The account was inaccessible. Not empty, inaccessible. A banner across the screen read account under review, access temporarily suspended, contact your branch manager. He stood up from his desk and walked to the men's room and locked the door and stood at the sink with the water running, looking at his own face in the mirror. He thought about Teller's missed call. His informant's formal text. His captain's declined call. The IA notification with its attached documentation. The frozen account. Each one, individually, was a problem he had navigated before. But all of them, arriving within 18 hours of each other, the morning after he had arrested a delivery girl on Garfield Avenue and pocketed an unmarked envelope from her bag, that was not bad luck. That was architecture. Someone had built this. Someone had been watching, and waiting, and had chosen this exact moment to pull every supporting structure out from under him simultaneously. Bradley gripped the edge of the sink and stared at his reflection, and for the first time in 11 years on Garfield Avenue, felt the specific and terrible sensation of a man who has just realized that the ground he has been standing on was never solid at all. The message came through on his personal phone at 9:47 that evening. Bradley was sitting in his apartment in the dark, still in his uniform shirt with the collar open, an untouched glass of whiskey on the coffee table in front of him. He had spent the day making calls that went unanswered, sending messages that were not returned, and visiting 3 separate locations where people who owed him years of loyalty had either not been present or had greeted him with the flat, avoidant energy of someone who had already been told not to engage. His captain's office had been locked. The branch manager at his secondary bank had informed him, in a voice carefully emptied of inflection, that the review on his account could take an indeterminate amount of time and that she was not able to provide further information at this stage. He had driven around the district for 2 hours in the evening without any particular destination, passing his usual corners, watching his usual spots, trying to locate some version of the world he had operated in comfortably for 11 years. It felt like driving through a city that looked identical to the one he knew but had been altered in some fundamental way he could not quite see directly. He came home and sat down and did not turn on any lights. When his phone buzzed, he looked at the screen expecting another notification from Internal Affairs, or a formal communication from the department, or possibly nothing meaningful at all. His nerves had been misreading signals all day. But it was a text from a number he did not recognize, and the message was 4 lines. It gave an address on the east side of the financial district. It gave a time, 11 o'clock. It said there was a room on the 4th floor that was expecting him. And the last line said, simply, "Every door still open to you leads here. This is the only one worth walking through." Bradley read it 3 times. He thought about not going. He thought about it seriously, sitting in the dark with the whiskey he still hadn't touched, running through whatever alternatives still existed. He could go to the department's IA office himself, get ahead of the complaint, try to shape the narrative from the inside. He could call a lawyer. He had the name of one who had helped officers in difficult situations before. He could leave the city tonight, go somewhere the account freeze and the IA review and the unanswered calls couldn't reach him yet. He thought through each option with the careful attention of a man trying to find solid ground, and each one collapsed under examination the moment he applied any real weight to it. The IA complaint came with documentation. Someone had said that deliberately, in the notification, so he would know. His lawyer had not returned 2 calls today. And leaving felt, in some way he could not fully articulate, like a door that would close behind him permanently the moment he stepped through it. He picked up his keys at 10:20 and drove to the address. The building was exactly what it appeared to be from the street, a clean, unremarkable office building in a respectable part of the financial district. The lobby was unstaffed at this hour, but the front door opened when he tried it, and the elevator was already on the ground floor waiting. 4th floor. He rode up in silence, his jaw set, one hand loose at his side and the other pressed flat against the elevator wall without his fully realizing it. The room at the end of the 4th floor hallway had its door open. A single lamp burned on the credenza. The long table was empty except for one thing, a dark manila folder sitting precisely in the center, aligned with the table's edge as though someone had measured the distance. Kim Yong-Sun was seated at the far end of the table. Bradley had never seen him before. He would not have been able to identify him from any database, any file, any information his precinct had access to, because Yong-Sun did not appear in those systems in any meaningful way. What Bradley saw was a lean man in a black suit, dark shirt underneath, sitting with the composed and absolute stillness of someone who had never once in his life needed to fill silence with noise. A faint scorpion tattoo curved along the side of his neck. His hands were folded on the table. He was not performing anything, not menace, not authority, not anger. He was simply present, in the complete and unhurried way that certain people are present when they hold every relevant card and are in no rush to play them. He gestured once toward the chair on the near end of the table. Yong-Sun reached forward and slid the manila folder the length of the table. It stopped precisely in front of Bradley's hands. The first page was a financial summary, his secondary account, every deposit logged by date and amount, going back 9 years. The second page was a map of his district with locations marked, each one annotated with dates, names, and transaction amounts. The third page was a transcript. He recognized the conversation, a specific exchange from 4 years ago in the back of a restaurant on his block, a conversation he had been completely certain no one else could hear. The pages continued after that. He did not count them. There were many. Yong-Sun spoke for the first time. His voice was quiet and even, carrying no more weight than necessary. "You arrested someone who works for me," he said. "You took something that belongs to me. And you have spent 11 years building the kind of record that, when it arrives at the right desk, ends careers and opens federal cases." He paused briefly. "It has arrived at the right desk." Bradley's hands were on the folder. He could feel them trembling and could not make them stop. "What you are holding is a copy," Yong-Sun continued. The original is already with people who know how to use it. What happens next depends entirely on how cooperative you choose to be with the process that is already underway. He unfolded his hands and rested them flat on the table. Sophia Rogers will be released tomorrow morning with a formal acknowledgement of improper arrest. You will not contest that. You will not file any counter-complaint, contact any witness, or attempt to access or influence the IA review in any direction. He said nothing further. The room was completely still. Bradley looked down at the folder, at 10 years of his own corruption laid out with the clean, merciless precision of someone who had been paying attention long before today. He thought about arguing. The impulse rose and then dissolved almost immediately, because there was nothing in this room to argue against. There was only the folder, and the quiet man at the end of the table, and the understanding that every version of resistance he could generate had already been anticipated and made irrelevant. His hands were still shaking when he nodded. Sophia was told at 8:15 in the morning that her charges had been dropped. An officer she had not seen before, younger than the ones who had processed her, with the slightly uncomfortable bearing of someone assigned an errand they did not fully understand, came to the holding area and informed her without making eye contact that the department was declining to pursue the matter and that she was free to go. He used careful, neutral language, the kind of language that is chosen specifically to avoid implying that anything had gone wrong. She had been held for just under 20 hours. She stood, straightened her red cap, and followed him out. At the front desk, another officer she did not recognize handed her a form. It was a formal departmental statement on official letterhead, 3 paragraphs, acknowledging that the arrest conducted by Officer George Bradley on Garfield Avenue the previous afternoon had not met the legal threshold for probable cause, that the search of her personal property had been conducted without proper warrant or consent, and that the department regretted any inconvenience caused by the incident. The language was bureaucratic and bloodless and had clearly been written by someone whose primary concern was liability rather than accountability. But her name was on it, and the word improper appeared twice, and it was stamped and signed and real. She read it once, folded it carefully, and put it in her jacket pocket. The officer at the desk slid a second envelope toward her, her personal items, the ones that had been logged when she came in. Phone, keys, the small amount of cash she had been carrying. Her delivery bag was not there. She asked about it, and the officer made a phone call, and after a few minutes a different person appeared from a back room carrying the bag. The packages inside had been disturbed, shifted, partially opened in some cases, but they were there. She checked them against her mental inventory without showing any expression. The sealed envelope was not among them. She had not expected it to be. She signed for her belongings, took the bag, and walked out through the front entrance of the precinct into the morning light. The air outside was cool and carried the particular freshness of a city that had rained lightly overnight and was still drying. She stood on the front steps for a moment and breathed it in. She did not feel triumphant. She did not feel relieved in any simple way. She felt the specific, quiet satisfaction of someone who had stayed composed under pressure and come out the other side intact, which was its own kind of victory, even when no one was watching. She put her bag over her shoulder and started walking. She had calls to make, to her dispatch office, to explain the missed stops from yesterday, to log the disturbed packages and flag them for inspection. She made them as she walked, keeping her voice professional and steady, answering the dispatcher's questions without elaborating beyond what was necessary. She was told her route for the day was already loaded. She confirmed she could cover it. By 10 o'clock she was back on her regular circuit, moving through the city with the same even pace she always kept, cap low, bag adjusted, eyes forward. The streets looked the same as they always did. The vendors, the storefronts, the intersections she had crossed hundreds of times, all of it unchanged, ordinary, indifferent to what had happened to her in the past 20 hours. The city did not reorganize itself around individual injustices. It simply continued, and you either moved with it or you fell behind. Sophia moved with it. She was on the east side of the financial district at 11:40 when the black car pulled to the curb ahead of her. Same car, same unhurried stop, same rear window lowered just enough for a hand to extend. But this time there were two men standing outside the building nearby, dark suits, relaxed posture, positioned near the entrance in a way that was professionally casual and unmistakably deliberate. She had passed this building dozens of times and never seen anyone standing outside it. They were watching her approach. Not with suspicion. With the particular attentiveness of people who have been told to pay attention to a specific person. She walked to the car and took the envelope from the extended hand. It was the same as always, sealed, unlabeled, a replacement for the one that had been taken. She tucked it into the bottom of her bag with the practiced motion she had performed a dozen times before. As she turned back toward the sidewalk, the nearer of the two men by the entrance pulled the door open and held it, not because she was going inside, but simply as a gesture. She looked at him briefly. He gave a single nod, small, deliberate, unambiguous in its meaning. She nodded back and kept walking. Nothing about her had changed. She was the same woman she had been on Monday morning, same uniform, same bag, same route, same quiet discipline. She had not acquired anything new except a folded departmental statement in her jacket pocket and a slightly deeper understanding of something she had already suspected. The protection had always been there. She had simply never needed to see it from the outside before. At 11:53, 3 blocks away and entirely unaware of Sophia's mourning, George Bradley answered his apartment door in yesterday's clothes and found 2 federal agents standing in the hallway with a sealed indictment, a warrant, and the flat, unhurried expressions of people who had been expecting this appointment for a long time. He did not say anything. There was nothing left to say. The federal case against George Bradley moved with an efficiency that stood in sharp contrast to the 11 years his department had spent not moving on him at all. The documentation delivered to the U.S. Attorney's Office was comprehensive in the way that only long, patient observation produces, not a single dramatic piece of evidence but a dense, layered accumulation of dates, amounts, transactions, recordings, and cross-referenced incidents that built a portrait of corruption so thorough and so consistent that Bradley's defense attorney, a capable man who had navigated difficult cases before, reportedly sat with the file for 2 hours before advising his client to think very carefully about the costs of going to trial. Bradley went to trial anyway. That was the kind of man he was, someone who had spent so long operating without consequences that even standing inside a collapsing structure, he believed he could find a beam that would hold. He took the stand in his own defense. He was composed for the first hour and progressively less so as the prosecution worked methodically through the record, incident by incident, year by year, with the calm and unhurried thoroughness of people who had more than enough and knew it. The jury deliberated for less than a day. The conviction covered 14 federal counts: extortion, bribery, civil rights violations, obstruction of justice, and several financial crimes related to the accounts he had maintained outside the normal banking system for nearly a decade. The sentencing hearing was brief. The judge, a woman in her 60s who had presided over the district court for many years and had seen a considerable range of human behavior from her bench, looked at Bradley for a long moment before she spoke. She noted the duration of the conduct, the deliberate targeting of vulnerable populations, and the systematic abuse of public trust vested in a law enforcement position. She did not editorialize beyond what was necessary. The sentence was 12 years. Bradley was processed into the federal system on a Tuesday morning, handcuffed, photographed, stripped of his personal belongings, and walked through intake by correctional officers who moved with the same flat efficiency he had once performed on other people in other buildings. Several residents of the Garfield district had gathered outside the courthouse that morning. They stood on the sidewalk in small groups, quiet and watchful, not celebrating exactly, but present in the specific way that people are present when something they waited a long time to see finally happens in front of them. Lewis, the food cart vendor from the corner of 5th, was among them. He did not cheer. He simply watched the door until Bradley disappeared through it, and then he walked back to his cart and went back to work. That seemed, to anyone observing, like the right response. The precinct underwent a broader review in the months that followed. Bradley's captain was placed on administrative leave pending investigation and ultimately retired quietly under terms that were not made public. 3 other officers connected to Bradley's network of informal arrangements were suspended. The department issued a statement about its commitment to accountability that contained the standard language such statements always contain and was received by the Garfield district with the standard degree of measured skepticism such statements always receive. Change in institutions moves slowly and incompletely, and the people who live inside those institutions know that better than anyone. But Bradley was gone. And that, for now, was real. Sophia was on her afternoon route when the verdict came through. She learned about it the way she learned about most things that happened at a distance from her daily work, a notification on her phone, glanced at briefly between stops. She read the headline, put the phone back in her pocket, and adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder. She had 3 more stops before the end of her route. She finished them. Kim Yong-Sun read the same notification in the 4th-floor room on the east side of the financial district. He noted it, set his phone down, and returned to the document he had been reviewing. The matter had concluded in the manner he had intended it to conclude. There was nothing further to attend to on that front, and there was always something else requiring attention. The city continued its ordinary operations around all of them, loud and indifferent and relentlessly forward-moving, as cities always are. The vendors on Garfield Avenue opened and closed their shops. The buses ran their routes. New people arrived and old ones left and the streets absorbed all of it without comment. Here is what the story of George Bradley finally amounts to, when you step back far enough to see its full shape. He was not undone by a more powerful enemy. He was not defeated by violence or outmaneuvered by a rival. He was undone by the simple and patient accumulation of every choice he had made freely over 11 years, arriving at his door simultaneously because one ordinary Tuesday he grabbed the wrong person's arm. His entire career had been constructed on a single assumption, that the people he targeted were invisible, isolated, and without recourse. He never questioned that assumption because it had never been tested. He looked at a young woman in a red delivery uniform and saw exactly what he always saw, what he had trained himself to see, what made his particular operation possible: nobody. He did not think to ask who she knew. He did not think to wonder what the sealed envelope contained or whose name was attached to the trust that had placed it in her hands. He had spent 11 years on that block and had never once considered that the most protected person on it might be someone he had never thought to look at carefully. That was his real mistake. Not the arrest. Not the envelope. The assumption that preceded both, the absolute, unexamined certainty that a quiet person in a humble uniform had no one in her corner. Power that sustains itself by making people feel small and alone is the most fragile kind of power there is. It survives only as long as the isolation holds. The moment that isolation breaks, the moment someone reaches for a contact saved under a single letter and sends one silent signal to someone who is already waiting, the entire structure has nothing left to stand on. Sophia Rogers was the same woman the morning after Bradley's conviction as she had been the morning before his arrest. Same alarm at 4:45. Same route sheet. Same quiet pride in never being late. The city did not give her a commendation or a headline or any formal recognition of what she had endured and how she had endured it. It simply continued, and she continued with it. She did not need the city's acknowledgement. She had something considerably more durable. Never mistake someone's quiet routine for helplessness. The most dangerous loyalties in this world are the ones you cannot see, and the ones you never thought to look for. If justice found its way to the right person in today's story, hit that like button and leave a comment telling us what you thought of Bradley's verdict. Share this with someone who loves watching the truth finally arrive on schedule, and subscribe to Midnight Mob Chronicles, because the next story is already waiting, and it is worth staying for.